Good morning once again, everybody. You guys ready to do some work on some relationships? Today is the second sermon in the series I'm calling Restoring Relationships. And that's what we're trying to do. Each of us have got those relationships that are strained, that maybe even be severed or that are broken, and that need our attention, need some work. And when it comes to restoring relationships, it's going to be work, okay? It's going to be the definition of work, which is not always pleasant, going to be difficult, but hopefully it will produce a good result, okay? The title of this morning's sermon is Trust is a Must. That in order for a relationship to be what it was meant to be, the foundation of trust has to be well established. It has to be mended. It has to be put into place. Every relationship, whether you realize it or not, trust is the foundation for which that relationship is built. Think about that just for a minute. Any relationship that you have, whether it's superficial, it's just kind of, you have a passing relationship with somebody, or whether it is meaningful and intimate, the foundation of that relationship, the basis for that relationship is always trust. How many of you have restaurants on your list of places you refuse to eat? Got any restaurant that you refuse to walk into? Probably. And the reason that you have that is because at some point there's been a trust issue that has been broken. Trust has been violated. Whether maybe you found a bug in your food, whether or not maybe you had a bad experience with the service, maybe whether or not you had food poisoning from that establishment. Oh, that's enough. Trust has been violated. I'm done with the relationship, right? Okay, maybe some of you don't have any issues with trusting eating establishments. How about this? How about any of you ever been to a barber or a hairdresser? And you had this relationship with them for years and years and years, and you went to them all the time. But there was that one time, just one time, they messed up your hair. And now, that relationship, over. I'm never going back there. Why? Because you don't trust them to do what they said they were going to do. When trust is broken, regardless of the relationship, whether it's superficial, we just see them in passing, or whether it's an intimate, meaningful relationship, when trust is broken or violated, that relationship becomes severed and strained. And so that's why I tell you this morning that when it comes to relationships, especially repairing and restoring relationships, trust is a must. Today I want to give you 3 reasons why it's hard for us to trust. And then we're going to end with some good news of how to restore trust once it's been broken. So first, let's talk about why is it hard for us to trust? If you've ever been hurt, if you've ever been betrayed, then you understand why it's hard to trust. We're Christians. This is a Bible-believing church. We believe that the Bible is God's Word given to us, and it has the answers to all of life's problems, including trust issues. So if we've got problems with trust, we're going to go to God's Word for answers on how to repair that, or for understanding of why that trust has been violated. And so we're going to be studying a lot of chapters today. All of them are found in the book of Genesis. If you want to open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 25, that's where we're going to start. And we're going to be studying all the way through Genesis chapter 33. Now, obviously, we're not going to have time to read all of these verses in their entirety. So I'm going to be reading some selected scriptures from these chapters, and then I'm going to fill in the gaps with my own summary of the story. But let me give you some background as we dive into Genesis chapter 25. God made a promise, and it started with a man by the name of Abraham. And he said, Abraham, I'm going to bless you. You're going to be this great and powerful nation. And eventually we understand that promise to be fulfilled, that Abraham was the father of the nation of Israel. But it didn't start that way. It started with Abraham and Sarah, and they had a son. And this particular son they had together, you remember his name? Isaac. Thank you so much, Jack. It is Isaac. They had a little baby named Isaac. And you remember how Abraham was asked by God to sacrifice him and he didn't have to because God provided a ram? That whole story. So Isaac was the blessing through which the promise was going to be fulfilled. Well, Isaac gets married and he and his wife have got twin boys, Jacob and Esau. And these twin boys, one of them would be the blessing through which the promise would be fulfilled eventually as well. And these twin boys, well, let's just read about it here in Genesis chapter 25. Look at verses 27 and 28. It says, "When the boys grew up, Esau, who was the older one, became a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob." Those two verses right there set the stage for everything that we're getting ready to study. Twin brothers. One was favored by his dad, the other was favored by his mom. And that would forever put these two in conflict with one another. Side note, parents, make sure you're not playing favorites with your kids. It is great wickedness to express favoritism among your children. You make sure each one is treated equally. Because if you don't, it will produce problems down the road, guaranteed. Those problems may manifest themselves long after you're gone, but it will produce problems, guaranteed. Well, this is a sermon about trust, not on parenting. So back for to the topic for the day. So we have these two twin brothers, and they were as different can be. And at the end of Genesis chapter 25, we learn that Esau, who was the older, was out hunting one day. And he gets back after a long day of hunting, and he finds his brother Jacob has prepared some delicious soup. And he's hungry, and he wants a bowl. And Jacob is like, "Oh, you want a bowl of my soup? Okay, you can have a bowl of my soup, but it's going to cost you something." You know, I can just see this kind of playing out between siblings. "Well, what's it going to cost me? Just give me a bowl of soup." No, you want a bowl of soup? It's going to cost you something. He says, "What's it going to cost me?" He says, "Your birthright." And Esau's like, "I'm so hungry, I don't care right now about a birthright. What good's it going to do to me if I die of hunger?" "All right, birthright, schmirthright, you can have it." And so Esau gives away his birthright to his younger brother Jacob over a stupid bowl of soup. What's a birthright? Real quick. A birthright was an honor that was given to the firstborn. It bestowed upon him the head of household status. And really what it meant was that the oldest son was to carry on the spiritual commitments of the family. Not only that, but the son with the birthright would receive a double portion of whatever was inherited and passed down. And so Esau was like, that tells you a little bit about Esau's character. I don't care about being the spiritual leader of my family. I don't care about getting a double portion of inheritance. I can't think about the future. All I can think about is the here and now. I'm hungry. Here, have my birthright. And so he eats the soup. And Genesis chapter 25, verse 34 tells us that Esau forfeited his birthright. Well, we fast forward here to Genesis chapter 27. The dad, Isaac, is on his deathbed. And before he dies, he wants to pass along the family blessing to one of his sons. And he's wanting to pass along the family blessing to Esau because that's his favorite son. And so he makes this deal with his son Esau, and he says, "Hey, look, I'm about ready to die, but before I die, I could really go for some of the food that you hunt and that you prepare. So why don't you go hunt me something to eat, and when you get back, I'm going to give you this blessing." By the way, the blessing was different than the birthright. The blessing was a prophetic prayer that was to be prayed over the one who was chosen by the Father to bless. And in this case, Isaac wanted to bless his son Esau, only he ended up blessing his son Jacob instead. How did that happen? Well, let's read about it. Genesis chapter 27, starting in verse 1. Now it came about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son, here I am," Esau said. Isaac said, "Behold, I'm getting old and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out into the field and hunt some game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love. And bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die." Rebekah, that's the mom, was listening while Isaac was speaking to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game to bring home, Rebekah said to her favorite son Jacob, "Behold, I heard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, listen to me as I commanded you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death.'" Jacob is scratching his head. He's like, "I don't know about this, Mom. It's not a good plan." He says, "Behold, Esau is like, have you seen him? He's really hairy. He's a manly man, and I don't have much hair. Perhaps my father will feel me, and then I will be as a deceiver in my father's sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing." It's interesting there in the verses that follow, Rebekah tells her son, "Don't worry about it. Let your curse be on me. Let's get this done." Jacob is intentionally being deceitful and manipulative in order to gain something that didn't belong to him. And his mother not only helped him, it was her plan. So the story plays out. Esau is out hunting. While Esau is out hunting, Jacob and his mom are working behind the scenes to get the blessing, and Jacob appears before his dad and tricks him into thinking that he's Esau. Puts some goat skin on him. And he's like, "Oh, you must be Esau." And Jacob successfully receives the blessing that was intended for his brother. Well, fast forward, Esau is successful. He comes back in from hunting. He fixed some food for his dad. He appears before his dad. He's like, "I made you some supper." And his dad's like, "What? Who's this? I've already given out the blessing." "You did? Who'd you give it to?" "Well, it must have been your brother." And you can imagine how well that went over with Esau when he learned that his brother tricked his father into taking what didn't belong to him. Genesis chapter 27, starting in verse 41. "So Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. And when my dad's dead and when I've done greed for my father, then I'm going to kill my brother Jacob." Now when the words of her elder son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent and called for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise and flee to Haran to my brother Laban. Stay with him a few days until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides and he forgets what you did to him. Then I will send for you and get you from there. Why should I be bereaved of both of you in one day?" And the result would be devastating to the relationship between Jacob and Esau. If there was any sense of trust that existed between these two, totally gone as a result of what Jacob did to steal away the blessing that was rightfully Esau's. So how did the relationship end up this way? They were brothers, they were twins. Those of you who are twins, you know the special bond that exists between twins. I've got a twin sister, and I can't explain it, but we're really close, okay? And if you know the bond that exists between twins, it's amazing. So we had these twin boys who were no doubt close, but over the years, the relationship's been strained because mom loved one and dad loved the other, and now we've got this competition going on, and now you've taken something from me that didn't belong to you. How did we end up this way? What happened to the trust? What happened to the intimacy? Well, here's the first reason why it's hard to trust. People are sinful. People are sinful. Jacob committed sin against Esau. He went to great lengths to steal what didn't belong to him, which was not intended for him. So naturally, this is going to create some trust issues between the two. If you remember, when the twins were born, Esau was born first, and Jacob came out doing what? Holding on to his brother's heel, right? That's why he was named heel. That's why he was named Jacob, because the name Jacob means heel grabber. It means deceiver. And Jacob lived up to his name because he would do anything to get ahead in life. He would cheat whoever he needed to. He'd trip up anybody who he was racing against in order to get ahead of them. And so he lived up to his name for sure. And so what breaks trust? In a word, sin. Maybe you have a relationship that is broken, and the reason that it's broken is because of some sin that happened. Let me give you the top 5 sins that I believe compromise trust in a relationship. Maybe you can come up with your own list. This is the list that I came up with. Here's my top 5. Number 1, lying. When you give flat out false information on everything, it's going to violate some trust. People are going to have a hard time trusting you. Because when you tell so many lies that a person can never believe whether or not what you're saying is the truth, it's going to be damaging to the relationship. They're going to be wondering, can I even trust what he's saying right now? Second top sin that violates trust: stealing. When you take something from someone that doesn't belong to you, or you take advantage of someone in some way, that's going to violate trust. Or if you've ever had something taken from you, you understand that violates trust. And it doesn't ever have to be anything materialistic in nature. It can be that they stole your innocence through abuse. Or it could be that they took your pride from you, made you look bad, or embarrassed you. But when someone takes something that doesn't belong to them, trust is violated, and it's gone, and it's going to break down the relationship, and it's because of sin. Third sin that damages relationships, trust in relationships, is slander or gossip. When you talk bad about someone behind their back, or you spread some bad news about a person in order to make them look bad or to intentionally hurt them, that is going to bring about some serious trust issues in the relationship. Fourth sin that violates trust: a failure to keep promises. You ever had someone tell you they were going to do something and then they didn't do it? Husbands, has this ever happened to you? You forget to do something once, and for the rest of your married life, your wife always asks you, "Did you do that? Did you do that?" "Yes, I did it." "Well, remember that one time you didn't do it, so now I've got to check in on you to make sure you're doing it." A failure to do what you say you're going to do violates trust. And this is the most common reason that it's hard to trust somebody. And the biggest promise that is broken in a marriage relationship that violates trust is adultery. Giving yourself intimately to another when you promise to forsake all others is a huge violation of trust. And it's a sin. Maybe you can think of another reason that trust was broken, but chances are, whatever the reason that the trust was broken in the relationship, I'm guessing that it's some sort of sin that occurred. Now, I think this will be encouraging to you. If you're suffering with trust issues, and the reason that you're suffering with trust issues is because of sin, and you're like, "I just don't know that I can trust that person ever again," here's what you need to know. This helps. I think it does. While it is true people are sinful, they're not born that way. They get that way. They're not born that way. That's not their nature. That's not who God created them to be, was sinners. They get that way. And the reason that I find comfort in that, and the reason that I hope you can find comfort in that, is because there's hope that they can choose to do the right thing. to do the thing of integrity when it comes to whatever it is they're trying to tell you that they're going to do. Eventually, they can be trusted again because they weren't born that way. We don't inherit Adam's sin. We get that way when we deliberately decide to do what's wrong. And if a person deliberately decides to do what's wrong, then guess what? A person can deliberately decide to do what's right. And that's encouraging. And that gives me hope to trust a person in the future. But the reason it's hard to trust people is because of sin. Second reason it's hard to trust people is because people are fickle. What does it mean to be fickle? To be fickle means to likely change with no good reason or inconstant. Man, as a preacher, I hate to report this to you because you would think that in the church, people should be able to be trusted time and time again, right? But as a preacher, I have seen this creep into churches. People are fickle. They can be singing your praises as they leave one Sunday morning. Man, that was a great sermon. You're the best preacher. Oh, I love this church. It's the greatest thing. And then a month from now, they're finding a different church family because something happened that they didn't like. And people are fickle. You ever have someone who liked you, who was like your best friend, and then something happened, you aren't even sure what, and then they just like bail on you? Maybe you have a boss who you were their favorite employee, and you used to get all the overtime, and you used to get the promotions and the considerations, and you had the trust of the boss. Next week, you don't know what happened, but the new guy's in town, and now the boss is trusting him with everything. People are fickle. I think about the life of Christ. Certainly people were fickle with Jesus. The same group of people who welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem and claimed Him to be their king, in a week's time, 1 week, went from, oh, hey, praise Jesus, we're glad He's here, our Emmanuel, right? And the next week they were shouting, kill Him, crucify Him, as Jesus stood next to Pilate. People are fickle. And that's the reason it's hard to trust people, because I don't know today, are you going to be my friend? Or today you're not going to be my friend? I can't. Hard to lean on you. Hard to know what's happening. Here's the third reason it's hard to trust. People are selfish. And I know that selfishness is a sin, right? But selfishness is a different kind of sin. Did you know this? It's not wrong to love yourself. Nowhere in the Bible are we ever told, don't love yourself. Okay? It's okay to love yourself. Here's the problem. Here's the commandment. We're told to love others more than you love yourself. When you put yourself above others, when you only care about yourself and you disregard the need of others, that is the problem. And this was definitely the problem for Jacob. He had a twin brother, and the only thing he could think about was, how can I get ahead? What can I do for me? He didn't care about what happened to his brother. He didn't care how it made him feel. He only cared about himself. I want you to think about your damaged and broken relationship. Think about how things could be different if each of you loved the other person more than you loved yourself. Think about how the relationship could have been different for Jacob and Esau if they were constantly putting the needs of the other ahead of themselves. Certainly, Jacob betrayed Esau's trust. But this is what I want to say too. It wasn't all one-sided. It rarely is. Whenever there's been a broken relationship and now you've got two people who are at odds with one another, very rarely have I ever found one person was all right and the other person was 100% wrong. Esau had a part to play in the damaged relationship with his brother. But Jacob didn't make things any better by deceiving his brother. That's a fact. So why is it hard to trust? Well, people are sinful, people are fickle, people are selfish. That's why it's hard to trust. Well, we've identified the problem, why it's hard to trust. Let's work towards the solution. How do we rebuild trust? How do we rebuild trust? Because the good news is that trust can be rebuilt, but the bad news is it's going to take time. It's not going to happen in a day. Now, as we talk about rebuilding trust, we have two parts to this. We've got those who have violated trust with someone else. In other words, you're guilty of either lying, stealing, violating trust of somebody close to you. You're the guilty party, okay? But we've also got the other side of the coin. Maybe you're the one who has had your trust violated. So first we're going to deal with the person who's violated trust with someone else. If you've broken a relationship because of a choice that you made, what do you do in that? How do you rebuild trust in that? Couple things. First of all, take responsibility for the role that you played. Own up to what you did. Don't justify it. Don't downplay it. Own it. If you were the person who committed the betrayal, be honest and acknowledge the damage and the hurt that you caused. And this means confessing and apologizing. That goes a long way to restoring trust in a relationship. Look, I screwed up. I'm guilty. I have no excuses for that. Shouldn't have done it. My bad. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? Be slow to speak and quick to listen. And as you're listening, listen well and take ownership for the mistakes that you've made. This is not about winning or losing. It's about putting all the cards on the table and restoring the relationship. And that means taking responsibility for the role that you played. So returning to our story of Jacob and Esau, last time we met them, Jacob was fleeing for Haran to get away from his angry brother who was going to murder him for the violation of trust that occurred. In Genesis chapter 32 now, 20 years has passed since these two have seen each other. 20 years. This relationship's been broken, has been severed. And Jacob has been working for his uncle Laban and has acquired a massive amounts of wealth, as well as two wives, Rachel and Leah. And in Genesis chapter 32, Jacob is wanting to head back home to the land of Canaan. And before he goes back home, he sends a messenger on ahead of him to sort of like test the waters. Can you see if Esau's kind of let water go under the bridge? Has he forgotten about what happened? It's been 20 years. Is he still wanting to kill me? And so Jacob makes this plan for meeting his brother for the first time after 20 years. And in Genesis chapter 32, we're not going to take time to read all these verses, but verses 13 through 21, Jacob has this elaborate plan to share some of the material wealth that he has accumulated with his brother Esau. And he's going to send on ahead of him, he's going to send 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. And he goes through and he makes sure that all of these things were delivered to his brother. And it's interesting. Why would he do this? Scholars are divided on why Jacob did this with his brother. Is he simply trying to bribe his brother and be like, don't kill me, have some of this? Maybe. Was it because Jacob was feeling guilty and he recognized, man, I was such an idiot 20 years ago. I messed up. I was such a dirtbag. I stole something from my brother that didn't belong to me. And I was blessed. And I'm going to share some of the blessing with my brother. Maybe. Whatever the motive, it worked. Because when Jacob and Esau are finally reunited face to face, this is what happens. Genesis chapter 33, verse 4. Then Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. I wish every relationship that's been broken, that's been strained, could end like this. And I'm not guaranteeing you this morning that as we're talking about restoring relationships, that every relationship is going to end like Jacob and Esau's. But I'm telling you this morning, a good start to restoring relationships, if you violated someone's trust, take ownership of that. Take responsibility. That's a good start. Second thing, if you violated trust with someone, allow time and space for grief. Give the other person plenty of time to move through their grieving process. Be patient and understanding with the one that you violated trust with. Understand that what you did, that what you said, hurt them deeply. And be patient if they're not healing as quickly as maybe you like them to. Well, it's been a month. I said I'm sorry. Be patient with them. Did you notice in our story, Jacob and Esau, as soon as Jacob stole the blessing from his brother Esau wanted to kill him. And where does Jacob go? He leaves and goes to Haran to give his brother time to cool off. Good plan. Good plan. Allow space and time for grief. Third thing to do if you violated trust against someone, follow through on the small things. The trust that you had with a person has been destroyed, and it needs to be rebuilt. And the way that you rebuild trust with someone is by proving your trustworthiness in small, incremental ways. I mean, it's pretty hard to trust someone with big things when they can't even come through on the small things. So if you're violated some trust with someone that you love and you're trying to restore that, follow through on what it is you say you're going to do. So if you commit to going out with friends, show up. If you say that you're going to mow the lawn or do the laundry, do it. If you promise to be home for dinner, keep that promise. Become a man or a woman of integrity. Keep your word. And with every commitment that you keep, no matter how big or how small, you're slowly building back the foundation of trust, one brick at a time. Well, now the second part, what to do if someone has violated trust against you. You're the one who's been hurt because trust has been violated. Here's the first thing that you do. Grieve. It's perfectly acceptable to go through the stages of grief. And I've been on the receiving end of hurt and betrayal, and at first you want to play it tough and you want to be in denial and be like, they didn't hurt me, no big deal, whatever. It's okay. And then maybe your denial moves to anger and then disbelief. Those are perfectly acceptable emotions to have when your trust in a person has been totally destroyed. Grief. Second thing, practice forgiveness. I'll say that again. You may have to swallow hard. Practice forgiveness. Now, I want to be real clear on this. I think sometimes, I've heard preachers say this. Maybe I've even been guilty of saying this at times, that our forgiveness needs to look like Christ's, right? It should in some degrees. But in other areas, Christ's forgiveness is immediate. As soon as I ask God for forgiveness, boom, He forgives me, right? I think when it comes to forgiving others, I think it's okay to take time with that, to wrestle with that. And I've also learned from personal experience that forgiveness of a person who's violated my trust will not happen until I've properly grieved what's been done to me. Now, we're going to have an entire sermon on forgiveness in this sermon series as we're talking about restoring relationships, but not today. Okay? But understand, something that you have to do is eventually you have to practice forgiveness. And we're going to have an entire sermon on that. Come back, we'll deal with that later. Here's the third and final thing that you have to do, and I think it's in conjunction with forgiveness. Leave the past in the past. Now, this doesn't mean that you pretend it never happened, that you ignore it, that you pretend and falsely think everything's hunky-dory. But once you've forgiven, then you leave the past in the past. You can't edit the past. You can't change the past. But you can agree to start over. And you can agree to put a period at the end of the old sentence, and you can ask yourself, what sentence do I want to write next? As we talk about forgiveness, we're going to talk about leaving the past in the past. And one of the things about leaving the past in the past is putting boundaries in place. And boundaries are perfectly acceptable to put them in place. Look, you've hurt me before. I'm not going to get hurt again. We're going to have some boundaries in place. You can come this far, but no further. And boundaries are an okay thing. But when you leave the past in the past, what you're doing is this means that you are not choosing to let the past dictate the present. That if I get into conflict with you now, I'm not going to throw out the past to you to make you feel like dirt so I win the argument in the present. Make sense? Leave the past in the past. Well, this morning, as we get ready to conclude our time together, I hope the one thing that you've seen in correlation as we're talking about relationships and restoring them is that everything kind of relates back to our relationship with God. And that's no coincidence, and that's no accident. Did you know the Bible tells us that we love because He first loved us? That as we were created in God's image, He created us with the ability to love one another and to trust one another. Animals don't have that. Humans do. And so as we're talking about how to restore relationships, we're ultimately talking about how to get into a right relationship with God, or what we expect our relationship with God to look like. And this morning, if you're struggling with trusting one another, if you've got somebody in your life that you can't trust, turn to God and know that He is willing and able to be trusted. He's a God who keeps His promises, who stands on His word, who's never forsaken you or abandoned you. And that's the kind of trust God wants you to have in your life for one another. Let's stand together, let's pray, and then we're going to have our time decision this morning.